Welcome to Redacted Opinions, unfiltered, raw, and authentic. The opinions expressed on this show are those of the hosts alone. And now, let's get on with the show.
Welcome back to Redacted Opinions, Unfiltered and Raw. I'm Luciano, so joining with me, Brian Clayman. And on today's podcast, which is episode number 3 of our new season and our new show, we're going to be continuing the conversation from last episode, which was really around some of the challenges about Canada's once vaunted immigration system and the challenges that we seem to be having with it, certainly over the last few years. And we have brought in a special guest, an expert in this type of discussion, which I'm going to turn over to Brian to introduce.
Thanks, Luke. We have as a special guest Phil Gurski. Many of you may know Phil. He's a very high-profile media guy on the topic of jihadism, terrorism, and I think that's his background, his expertise. I have a couple of notes on his bio, which I think is important for the listeners to understand. Phil is a seasoned national security expert with over 30 years of experience in intelligence, specializing in terrorism, radicalization, and national security threats. He served as a senior strategic analyst at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, from 2001 to 2015, focusing on homegrown radicalization and Islamist-inspired extremism. You also, I think, spent 18 years before that at the CSC, where you're basically eavesdropping on communications across the country.
Including yours, Brian. They were really boring, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Anyways, Phil is a go-to person on the media whenever something bad happens in this country or in this city, and they usually have him on radio or TV to give his expertise or comment. Phil, we're really thrilled to have you, and if I made any mistakes, please let me know.
Thanks, Brian. No, it's really great to be with you guys, and I'm getting a little tired of only getting calls from the CBC when shit goes wrong. I want to be called when a Canadian team wins the Stanley Cup or when we win the World Cup this year. That's going to happen. But can you please call me when something goes right as opposed to something goes wrong? But given my background, they tend to go to me when something, doesn't end up the way it should. So,
I don't think you're as sharp as I thought you were, because you said they only call you when something goes wrong. Our sports teams never go right. They're not going to call you, Phil.
This is true. This is true. But hope springs eternal that we will bring the cup back to Canada sometime this millennium. We got about almost 1,000 years left in it, so I'm confident.
We're thrilled to have you, Phil.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think you're the right person to talk about what we are going to get into today, because it's been in the news all over the place. And it has to be directly about immigration, but the fallout is really what I think we're going to be talking about. The implications of not having that proper system, doing the proper checks and making sure that people are listening to you guys, especially the experts, when you say that person shouldn't be allowed in this country. And the other sort of question I would put out there for you, Phil, is why we're talking about Canada specifically today, but it seems to be a problem with the US. It seems to be a problem more so with the UK. There's other countries experiencing the same type of challenges. Are they the same as what we're seeing in Canada or different?
Yeah, it's a great question, Luke. Obviously, it's a matter of scale. As bad as the perception is about what's happening in Canada, and it's partially true, we have the blessing of having 3 oceans around us, right? And a neighbor to the south that is also up on its game. The Europeans don't have that, right? If there is a war in Iran or in Syria or in Lebanon or whatever, the people can just basically get on their feet, get on a bus, get on a donkey cart, whatever, and they can cross borders and present themselves as refugees. And this is what you're seeing happening across Western Europe. We've all heard about this. Remember the boat people, the Vietnamese boat people way back in the 70s when the Vietnam War ended? We've got a new generation. They're crossing the Mediterranean. They're getting to France and they're crossing the English Channel, getting to the United Kingdom. I think, therefore, the challenge for most European states is that there's simply too little real estate and too many people. Again, we don't have the same problem because it's really hard to walk from France to Newfoundland. I wouldn't advise it because it wouldn't get very far. But we do have issues with people arriving undocumented. We've probably all heard the same stories of people get on a plane and they flush their passports, documentation down the toilet. It disappears, they show up, I have no documentation, you have to take me in. But I do think it is a matter of scale in terms of what our Western European partners are faced with as opposed to us. But as you said at the outset, guys, we do have serious challenges with our immigration system. And if they don't get addressed properly, what's happened, and you've probably seen the same opinion polls I have, for the first time in a very long time, a slim majority of Canadians wants fewer immigrants rather than more immigrants. As we were saying before we hit record, the 3 of us are the sons or grandsons of immigrants. We all came, our great parents or great parents or great grandparents or grandparents came to this country So we recognize the value of immigration. The problem is that when it's not done properly and things go awry, Canadians start to sour on the concept. It's very un-Canadian, I think, but it also speaks to the fact that Canadians are frustrated with the failures in the system as it stands right now.
It's interesting you talked about for the first time in a long time, Phil, that we're starting to see a few more people in Canada wanting fewer immigrants. And I think at the same time we're seeing, because in my opinion, of the terrible job we've done in Canada, and I think a lot of the Western democracies, you're seeing radical right, far extremist views coming up at the same time, overreacting, because as we all know, the vast majority of people that come to this country looking for a second, better life, bringing value to this country, it's just a very small minority, but we mishandled it terribly. And then you have all this overreaction.
It's a good point. I would caution that the far right problem, which is broadly defined as whether it's white nationalism or exceptionalism or, in God forbid, neo-Nazism, fascism, is an issue in Canada, not nearly as bad as it is in Western Europe or in the United States. A true story, guys, when I was retiring from CSIS in 2015, we were on the verge of stopping our investigation of the far right because there was simply nothing to look at. We'd exhausted that, and most of these guys were useless wankers that couldn't organize a piss up in a bar. And that, of course, has changed over the past couple of years. It's still not as big as the jihadists, as far as I'm concerned, although I'm biased. But yeah, the problem is that people key on certain incidents where something goes wrong, and they'll say, this is representative of the entire system. But it's important to stress, Brian, as you just said, 99.99% of immigrants come here for the right reasons. They become good citizens, productive, they contribute to the economy, they raise their kids, they pay their taxes, they volunteer on committees, they get good jobs. But the old phrase, it takes just one bad apple to spoil the bunch, right? And these groups are very good at highlighting those failures to try to paint the entire system as being completely broken. And their only solution, so they're very narrow-minded, the only solution is to shut the gates and throw away the key.
Luke, if I could just take this for a second, then I just want to kick this off with a question. I'm going to ask you first, Luke, okay? And then we're going to turn it to Phil to give us the unfiltered truth, the reality. But guys, in your opinion, does Canada's current security immigration system give enough weight to national security, public safety, and Canada's own national interests when assessing immigrants and refugee applicants? So Luke, as an outsider, because you and I aren't experts in this area, what are your thoughts? And Phil, I want to throw that to you.
I think, speaking from the public point of view, I am on the outside looking in. And when you listen to friends of ours and our discussions, I think the general sense is that the system is broken, that it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And to Phil's point, it generates frustration from ordinary Canadians who are just looking for legitimate immigrants to the country who are going to give something back. I think Canadians are tired of watching the Canadian flag get burned while all these other flags get paraded around. I don't care what country you're from. We are all on this call. I think if you go far back enough, we're certainly all descendants of immigrants. The one thing I want to add before you respond, Phil, is that I think there's also something that plays into this discussion is that people lump in refugees with immigrants, and they're not the same. So how do they approach those two different vectors, and how do they treat it differently?
Okay. So my very quick answer to this is that a lot of Canadians don't know what CSIS does. So the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, where I worked in counterterrorism for 15 years, as Brian said in his introduction, is the National Security Service. And one of the responsibilities of that organization, among many, is what we call security screening. And as it happens, it's actually the largest operational branch that CSIS has. And your listeners can go to the CSIS webpage. There's a whole section on security screening. There's an annual public report that CSIS puts out, in which they give numbers of the number of files that they process in a given year. And trust me, it's well over 500,000 files a year. And there's a variety of categories. So for example, CSIS is the organization that would do your security clearance. So if one of you gentlemen wants a secret or top secret clearance, CSIS would say, does Brian Clayman deserve a clearance? Does Luciano Cedrone deserve a clearance? The answer in both cases is definite no.
Yes.
But they'll overturn the rocks and say, does he have a criminal record? Is he known to us? Is he known to an ally to be working with a foreign power, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that CSIS does, to the best of my knowledge, and I want to be careful here, I might be speaking out of school, but when people apply to become citizens, CSIS also has a say. Again, they go back into their indices, they check their databases. Is there anything in this file that suggests we should not grant them citizenship? And then for a third category, it could be immigrants and refugees. I'm not really sure, but for certain countries that legitimately could pose a security concern to us, Oh, and by the way, we're not talking Norway and Liechtenstein.
Yeah.
We're talking about certain Middle Eastern and Asian nations. CSIS is also asked to take a look at, should this person be granted a visa or granted entry to the country? So CSIS does its due diligence and it forwards reports to the government. But here's where the system doesn't work, guys. CSIS is doing its job to the best of its ability with the resources and time that it has. The problem is that what CSIS puts up is only advice. It's not a decision. And we certainly found under the previous government, the Trudeau government, that wanted to ramp up immigration. If you guys recall the numbers, right? I mean, on average, we were taking in, if memory serves me correct, about 250,000 people a year. And that figure went through the roof under Trudeau. And there were even some stories I saw in the media that certain organizations, agencies were telling CSIS, speed up your process, skip a few steps. We need more people in the country. You guys may have heard of the Century Project, which was a goal to make us 100 million people by, I think it was 2040 or something like that. If you're going to speed up the process and you're going to get CSIS to start omitting steps in their security screening, guess what happens? Mistakes are going to happen. You're not going to do a proper check, and they get people in the country who shouldn't be here with criminal backgrounds or, heaven forbid, terrorism backgrounds or working for a foreign state, so espionage, sabotage, subversion, etc., because the advice was not adhered to. And to me, the bottom line, and I've been saying this, and many former CSIS directors have been saying this for decades, the problem is that we have a very poor intelligence culture here in Canada. What I mean by that is that the decision makers, the politicians, are not adhering to the intelligence that they're being provided by the security services. They don't understand it. They don't trust it. They don't want it. It complicates their lives. It's too hard to understand. And as a consequence, we're not going to use it. I'm not saying CSIS is perfect. Absolutely not. But you've got an agency that does its best to advise the government on threats to national security and public safety. And at the end of the day, it sees that people are being admitted in anyhow. So you can imagine what that does for the morale of the organization, right? Brian Clayman, we've told that Brian Clayman is a bad dude. And yet here he is on Spark Street in Ottawa or on University Ave in Toronto, walking down the street because we decided we wanted to let him in the country. So that's the problem with the system right now. The system is only broken because the intelligence advice that's being offered is not being acted upon.
You said a couple of things about, was it Project Century, I think you called it?
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
So they want to get more people to the country, and that's okay. But let me ask you a question, and maybe as a former CSIS guy, you're not able to answer. That's not your expertise. But why do you think, if that's the case, they are only going for a certain demographic of people? I have a theory, based on nothing but my own observations. Melanie Joly was heard talking to Tom Mulcair last year or so when some of this anti-Semitism stuff was going on and this anti-Israeli stuff in the pro. And when she was interviewed by Tom Mulcair and said, how come the government's not doing more? And she said, I don't think this is supposed to get out. It's because you got to understand who my constituents are, the people that vote for me. My theory, and I'm probably wrong, is that they're bringing in a certain group of people that they know will be indebted to the government so that they will get people to put them back in power. Am I crazy?
No, you're not. Look at you go, you might be crazy for other reasons. I don't know you all that well. But you look across Canada and you pick a riding at random. And you'll see that there's a certain demographic of that riding. So let's say, for example, some ridings in the lower mainland of British Columbia. A lot of those lower mainland ridings have a very large Sikh population. People who fled India, fled the Punjab for a better life. And so if you're the MP for that riding and you bring in more people from under the world, guess what? They're going to, as you said, Brian, they're going to be beholden to you. There's a good chance you're going to get reelected. Look at the Tamil population. Guys, we have a public safety minister who recused himself from anything to do with the Tamils. And it was pointed out by CSIS that this guy, in fact, our minister, the Minister of Public Safety, was a supporter of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, the LTTE, which was a brutal terrorist organization that's more or less disappeared since 2009. Here's a minister who was a former supporter of a terrorist organization who now says, I don't want to see any Tamil files because I might be biased. No shit, Sherlock. You supported the Tamil Tigers in the first place. So I think what's happened, and I'm not getting all conspiracy theory on you, is there has been a politicization of the process. And I think when Melanie Joly said, I think it was a hot mic at the time.
Hot mic. I think that's what it was, yeah.
She wasn't lying. She knew exactly who her voters were. And if she doesn't pony up for them, they're going to vote for somebody else. So there's been this recognition by politicians that I got to keep my constituents happy. And if my constituents happen to be X, Y, or Z, guess where my support's going to go? It sounds crass. It sounds cheap, but I don't think that's an inaccurate reflection of how the system works.
You said that CSIS gives advice, you don't make the decision, and I think in a democracy, that's the right way to do it.
Absolutely.
But that presupposes that the political leaders are doing what's best for the country, not for the party. We find ourselves in a situation where I don't think CSIS has an ulterior motive, but clearly governments might have, and that motive is to get reelected. So I think we find ourselves in a very difficult situation.
We do.
And I just wanted to add, doesn't that bring the lens onto that whole foreign interference? The people are here, you're bringing them in with that motivation to get the votes. Of course, those governments are going to find ways to motivate that diaspora for their advantage and start slanting the system towards their needs.
So what you're referring to, Luke, has also been called transnational repression, where if you fled China, let's say you're a Uyghur Muslim or a Tibetan, or you have fled Iran, or you have fled India, and you were known to be a dissident or someone against the regime in power, and they found out you live in Vancouver or Toronto or Ottawa or Sherbrooke for that matter, and you're still vocal against the regime, they will send agents either through their embassies and consulates or high commissions or using criminal gangs. We all remember the Najjar case back in 2023, where a Sikh activist who was labeled a terrorist by the Modi government was killed. He was killed at the behest of India. We know that as a fact. The Indians used a group called the Lawrence Bishnoi Gang, which is a very violent criminal organization in India, to basically whack him. It was a hit job. So yes, it does happen here. And that really does, again, it casts a really a black eye, I think, on the immigrant community, because you guys have both said it. The vast majority of people come here for the right reasons. They want to make a better life for themselves and for their children. The problem we encounter, you know this, Brian, with the post-Hamas attack in 2023, which was a heinous, cowardly act by Hamas against a folk festival. That's all you can call it. These weren't brave heroes. These were wanker cowards that killed innocent people. Then we saw the huge support for the Palestinian cause. And I must admit, the Israeli Defense Forces made huge mistakes in Gaza with civilian casualties, and they should be legitimately criticized. As a democracy, they have to accept that. The problem is that people are bringing the problems from home. Look at Air India, right? Largest act of aviation terrorism in history prior to 9/11 was carried out by Sikh Canadians seeking to punish India for not granting independence to Khalistan, to the Punjab. So they imported a conflict back home, which you would think they'd fled here to get away from. And they're carrying it out on Canadian soil. And the same thing happened with the Tamil Tigers, with fundraising in the 80s and 90s. And that also casts a black mark on the immigration system. Because they say, you're not really Canadian, because you have one foot back in the homeland, and you're causing all kinds of problems here. We've all heard the stories in Brampton, guys. Fights between Hindu Canadians and Sikh Canadians. Again, they're playing out the old homeland conflicts on the streets of Brampton. And it's getting violent and people are getting killed. So I think that's another reason why Canadians are saying, I'm not sure this immigration system is working so much. If you come to the country, yeah, fine, we'll accept you. We love your cuisine, your dance, your culture, whatever kind of thing. Leave your conflict shit at home. You're now in Canada. You start acting like a Canadian. But the former prime minister then told us, like the Canadian, whatever that was supposed to mean. Yeah. And people think that they can do whatever they want.
The tragic shooting of that Toronto police officer last week, and the chief of police's press conference yesterday about that gun for hire network.
Yeah.
And the inference was, and I think it was more than an inference, that although the people doing the shooting are just local wankers and criminals, they're doing it for the money, the people calling the shots are in many cases foreign actors or people acting on behalf. Does this tie into what you're saying?
It does to a certain extent, and we have to be careful. We don't know all the details yet, but I just did an interview. I've done several interviews on this particular case that you're referring to, Brian, the killing of the Toronto constable. We don't exactly know who was the paymaster behind that, but you don't have to be an Einstein to suggest it's highly possible that, in fact, it was Iran. We know that they've done this in Europe. The FBI told us they're doing it in the United States. They arrested somebody a couple of months ago that may be linked to the shooting of the U.S. consulate on the university a few months ago. And he's definitely tied to an Iranian proxy called Kataib Hezbollah. So we know what's happening. Is that the case in Toronto? Speculative at this point, but still, the point is that, yeah, we're having foreign actors essentially finding people on Canadian soil who'll do their dirty work for them. The interesting part about the shooting of the constable is how many steps removed is that foreign actor? In other words, did they find someone who knew somebody who knows somebody who found a kid on Instagram or TikTok and said, hey, buddy, you're just a shit rat wanker for $800. Carry this act out and then you'll be $800 richer. We don't know. The investigation is still ongoing, but Again, it is a way to basically, it's tangential to what we're talking about here, but it's a way to take advantage of the very weak system that we have here in Canada.
That's pretty scary, Phil, because the attack vector has changed. It used to be when I used to do investigations and Luke used to do organized crime as a policeman, right? He knows a guy who knows a guy. It used to be simple because you were able to easily go back from the guy that did the street action to who the person controlling it was.
Yeah.
Now you've got all these filters, and the people are removed not just by city, but by countries. What does that say for the future? Are we going to see more stuff, especially given that we do not have an intelligence culture appreciation of
I
this?
think we are. In fact, I'm calling this a game changer. To the best of my knowledge, this is, if not the first, one of the very few, what I would call is, if it's proven that there's an Iranian link to this, we're now talking state-sponsored terrorism on Canadian soil by a foreign actor. And as somebody who worked in counterterrorism at CSIS, worked on hundreds of cases, you're right. They're all local boys. They may have had contacts abroad, but no one was directed from abroad. They thought of these grandiose ideas on their own. Think of the Toronto 18. This is all stuff that they made up. But now we're talking about someone who's been directed or indirectly directed by a foreign state to do this. And are we going to see more? We're going to see more because it works, Brian. What I've heard is that the drive-by shooting at the U.S. consulate at University Avenue, those two wankers got $600 to do that. So imagine you're a foreign state. For $600, you can find some idiot online to drive by at 4 o'clock in the morning, get out of the car and take a few shots with a Glock or whatever at the embassy. Film it, by the way, because they have to film it to prove they did it to send back to get it $600. But imagine the return on investment. Wow. And depending on what happens in the investigation with the killing of that constable from Toronto Police Services, these people are able to have, and look at the effect it's had on Canada. Look at the media coverage. Look at the outpouring of condolences and the anger. So for a couple $100, you are turning society on its ear. And I don't mean this facetiously, but what a great business model.
And they use the system we're talking about to their advantage. You hear justices routinely now saying, oh, don't worry about that rape. Don't worry about that murder because we don't want to compromise your immigration status. Are you kidding me? Like, where is the headspace in this country's leadership?
And you raise a good point. And one thing that so my co-hosts on Spies Like Us, we've been talking about this for months now. We have a terrible removal system. So if it turns out you came here on false pretenses, under Canadian law, if you lied about who you were, and we find out, that is immediate grounds for removal. So what happens? You lawyer up. And then you get local groups to speak on your behalf. The case that I've been involved with, it just drives me nuts. We've had Canadians go join ISIS, and now they're sitting in a refugee camp or whatever, and they're crying and they tell a terrible story about how bad things are there. I just want to come home. And we've got people who actually go to bat for them. These poor Canadians. We have a moral obligation to rescue these Canadians. And my response is, if you're on a sunwing vacation to the Dominican and a hurricane hits, yeah, I would say we have a moral obligation. If you join ISIS to behead people and enslave Yazidi girls and rape them, we have no moral obligation towards you at all. Sucks to be you, sweetheart. You're stuck in a camp the rest of. I don't really care what happens to you. Children, that's a whole different issue, but I won't go into that. But we've got people who think that, what was the phrase a couple of years ago? No one is illegal.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that campaign? That's like defund the police, right? What other great slogan. But when you've got a mentality that the security services are racist, the government is racist, everyone's racist if you don't believe in my case, or if you're trying to instigate some kind of legal procedure, then we've got terrorists in Canada. We've been trying to deport for 30, I stress, 30 years. Some of whom have gained citizenship. Because we can't put them back.
Some of whom
some have paid.
lots
That's
of money.
right.
Oh, millions of dollars. Trust me, millions of dollars. And that speaks to another issue that it's this intelligence to evidence conundrum we have in the country. Again, we won't get into that, but the point is, and I go back, just reiterate what we're talking about, guys, about here's the security services telling you this stuff. It's advising you. We've got really solid information on Luciano Cedrone or Brian Clayman. The government says, yeah, whatever. Once you're here, guys, you're here. The chances of removing you are next to zero. Now, the French have a very different policy. If you're in France and you're there illegally, it turns out you have jihadi sympathies or whatever, they punch your ass back in a heartbeat. They don't care what happens to you.
So I think has started that.
They're just saying, sucks to be you. You shouldn't be here in the first place. There's the door, use it. But for some reason, we get our knickers in a knot, high standards. What if something happens to them?
I'm really concerned because I think we live in a country that's a liberal democracy. Life is good. We've enjoyed the Cold War dividend where we don't know hunger, we don't know violence. We've had a very cushy life. And I'm afraid, because I've done a little bit of research on World War II and what happened in Europe and the Holocaust, and I'm afraid before we do anything definitively, we're going to have our nose bloodied.
We are. That's the unfortunate reality.
Yeah, the politicians, the judges, okay, the judges, their kids aren't getting raped. They're not being extorted. They don't live in the same world. And I don't know how this changes until we get our noses bloodied.
I'll tell you, Brian, if the killing of the constable in Toronto isn't a wake-up call for the judges and the courts and the adjudication panels and the appeals boards and whatever the hell the rigmarole of administration is, then what's it going to take? Here's a guy that leaves, I think the kids were in the early teens, leaves a widow, guy just doing his job. If that doesn't give us an idea that there's something wrong with the system, what's it going to take? Is it going to take 10 constables killed? 100? I don't know. I don't know.
You know what, Phil? And Luke, I don't know what your experience is, but when I talk to people that are not in the business type thing, that they just have no idea. They're living their la la land. They don't realize how precarious what we have is.
And that's the importance of what a podcast like what I'm doing and what you guys are doing. It's getting the message out there that something is badly broken. We're not saying the sky is falling. We're just saying there is an issue and it has to be addressed, because if we don't address it, there are going to be more shootings and there are going to be more deaths. I think an average Canadian would say, I don't want more of that stuff. So what do I need to fix the system so that it doesn't happen more often? Kudos to you guys for what you're doing, because we joke around a lot and we may come across as a little bit like Neanderthal, dragging our foreheads on the ground, but this is a serious problem. And until we address it, it's not going to get any better.
I think that's a good place to leave it, Brian, because I'm watching the clock. I know you get involved in your time, but I think that's a great place to stop. You summed it up pretty well. Unfortunately, I agree with you. I don't know what it's going to take. I just don't see it changing anytime soon.
No.
And I'm afraid to think about what it will take for people to change their minds. Look at what's going on in the UK with all these people getting killed in the streets now, and that conduit back to our immigration discussion, our refugee discussion. So I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing that kind of stuff here out in the public, and maybe that'll change the perspective. But I don't see that anything changing in the short term.
Something's got to give. Something's got to give.
We're at the end point.
Yeah, before we sign off, I just need 2 minutes. Phil, I want to say a couple of things. I want to promote your podcast, Spies Like Us. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
I believe you release every Friday.
That every Friday or Saturday, yeah.
Friday or Saturday. Just take 2 seconds to talk about the premise of that, and then there's one more thing I want to talk about.
So Spies Like Us, it's myself and 2 colleagues from CSIS, Unfiltered and Neil Bisson. We're combined, we like to say we have 90 years of experience within the RCMP, CSIS, Canada Border Service, and CSE. We've done it all. And it's basically 3 guys in a virtual bar shooting the shit about national security. So it's lighthearted like what your guys are doing, but it's also got a serious aspect. We usually address 2 topics per episode. They're about a half an hour length, and we call it like it is. It's hard hitting, and we're trying to get a point across to Canadians. If I could also do this, I have my own podcast called Canadian Intelligence A, where I interview people such as yourselves, usually one-on-one on a topic. It's not just strictly Canadian, it's international in scope. But again, it all surrounds national security and public safety issues. And those are usually published on Monday mornings on my website, borealisthreatandrisk.com.
I strongly suggest to anyone listening to this podcast to check us out. Phil's not the competition. I've learned so much working with Phil over the years. It is a fantastic podcast. You don't only learn, but the time goes by quickly, and you guys have some fun as you're doing it. And the last thing I want to talk about, Phil, you're a published author. You're trying to be like me. I'm at 1 book. I think you're at 300 books right now, and you've just released one. And I think you've got another one coming. Can you take a second to talk about that?
Sure. So in my retirement, my kids joke that I suck at retirement, which is actually absolutely true. So I've written 9 books to date. The most recent one that came out in April, a bit of a lark. It looked at the Fenian threat to Canada in the 1860s. The Fenians were Irish Americans that wanted to invade Canada to put pressure on Britain to grant Ireland independence. So it's a bit of a historical book. The one coming out to be released on 9/11, so September of this year, which marks the 25th anniversary of 9/11. I look at the attacks of 9/11 and I look at what's happened 25 years later and where we are both here in Canada and internationally in terms of the global terrorism threat, as well as other threats like espionage, sabotage, etc. And that'll be published by Optimum International. I'll be launching it here in Ottawa on 9/11. So if you're in the area, stay tuned for social media posts on when we're going to be launching that book.
Luke, we should take the motorcycle.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That sounds like a ride. That's a weekend.
I'm up for that. My place, but you guys are welcome.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great idea. We'll go up there and see Phil release his book. That'd be great.
Excellent.
Phil,
Okay.
listen, thank you so much. You're just a
Yeah,
wealth
pleasure.
of knowledge and you're just a great guy. So,
Thank you.
Luke, you can sign us off.
Yeah, that's it, folks. Until next week, we're back on Thursday with our next episode, which will just be me and Brian. So I'll have to
Oh,
survive that
boring.
for 30 minutes. I know. But Phil, again, like Brian says, really appreciate taking the time to sit
Thank
with
you,
us today
guys.
and share your wealth of knowledge with us. We really appreciate your
That was a lot of
input, your
fun. Thanks,
experience.
guys.
Yeah, always. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Phil.
Talk to you
Okay.
later, guys. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Redacted Opinions. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed our podcast to help build our audience. Tune in next week for another episode of Redacted Opinions.